Feature and a short.
Welcome to Feature and a Short. I am your host, Justin Joseph Hall, director and editor at Fourwind Films in Quatre-Vingts. As many of you avid listeners know, at the end of each season of Feature and a Short, although we have not done a full season, we dole out our Fresh Air Award. What is the Fresh Air Award, you might ask? It's the conversation you're about to hear. 4 cinephiles arguing in the favor of 5 movies from the assigned decade. When we are discussing, we won't be talking about the best movie from each decade per se, as so many other awards talk about, but rather we're looking for the work that has most impacted movie making, truly discussing influential motion pictures. This podcast is called Feature and a Short. Therefore, nominations must include at least 1 feature and 1 short movie from each of our 4 contributing cinephiles lists. A feature is defined by the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences as any movie over 40 minutes, and a short is any movie under 40 minutes. But other than that, if the piece contains moving images and came out in the decade, it is allowed to be considered for this award. Our previous winners include the 2010's The Act of Killing by experimental documentarian Joshua Oppenheimer, the 1900's Phantasmagory by animator Emil Cole, the 1910's South by explorer Frank Hurley. The 1920s had the experimental documentary Man with a Movie Camera by Dziga Vertov. And last year it was Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, the first feature animation by Disney that took home the prize. This year we're discussing 20 nominations of films from the 1940s. Before we get to our nominees, let's gather some historic knowledge on what was going on in the world and in the movie industry into the 1940s. The 1940s began when the greatest conflict known to man diverted resources from making films to destroy human beings. Many filmmakers were involved in the war efforts. Stars and writers like Clark Gable, Alex Haley, Jimmy Stewart, and Paul Newman all served in the military. They were stars of the past and would be stars of the future. Jean Renoir, Sergei Eisenstein, and Frank Capra were all commissioned to make propagandic documentaries. Marlene Dietrich left Germany to seek refuge away from the Nazis in France. Audrey Hepburn served as a courier between Dutch resistance groups. Toshiro Mifune was drafted and served as a military photographer. The 1940s saw the advent of the Italian neo-realist movement and the classic period of film noir commence, which was popularized by The Maltese Falcon. War stories were popular at the box office, with notable films like Casablanca and Obsession. These popular genres were often dark in tone, reflecting the horrors of the Second Great War. The war reduced film production to a third of what it was. Even then, the war was good to Hollywood. As from 1942 to 1945, Hollywood experienced the most stable and lucrative years in its history. In 1946, 2/3 of the American population went to the movies at least once a week. However, anti-communist investigations into stars like Edward G. Robinson, Elia Kazan, and Dalton Trumbo led to the end of the golden age of cinema. Blacklisting began. In 1948, the Supreme Court ruled the major studios were vertical monopolies. They forced studios to sell their theater chains. This brought rise to more competition as smaller companies could compete. Outside the United States, other countries began to implement film quotas and import taxes in order to protect from American dominance. However, American firms just began investing in foreign films. The new laws made it more predictable and also helped studios avoid the high costs of the United States labor. In 1948, Alexander Ostruch wrote famously that filmmaker writes with the camera as a writer writes with his pen. Arguably, it's the phrase that had the greatest effect over the film industry by any critic, permanently taking the crown of creative power away from the screenwriters in film. And with that, let's introduce our guests. Kevin Cecil, who we will be referring to as Cecil. Say hi.
Hello, everyone.
He is the co-host at Brooklyn Nighthawks Movie Trivia and is here with us for the first time. And our other Kevin Hinman. Kevin is a rapper, writer, and cinephile living the dream with his wonderful wife, Kara, and his cat, Thomas, in Southern California. He stays busy watching movies, collecting records, and making music with his friends. Say hi, Mr. Hinman.
Hey, everybody. It's good to be back.
All right. John Robert Hammerer, we call him by JR, so we're going to do that in this podcast, has been fascinated by films and filmmaking ever since he was wearing out a VHS tape of Fantasia while under the influence of chickenpox. He has directed numerous short films, edited film, television, and web content, and worked as an assistant editor and dailies technician for clients such as HBO, A&E, and Netflix. When not at work, he can be found somewhere in New York City being weird. JR, do you want to say hi?
I do want to say hi, so hi.
Great. And I, Justin Joseph Hall, am an award-winning multilingual director and editor, founder of Fourwind Films and Quatre Vents. You know me, my creative work has been acquired by major television networks. I've aided in receiving awards in such programs at the Emmys, Tribeca Film Festival, and many more. So thank you to the great panelists. I love film history, and I love getting together once a year to learn and discuss the medium that affects our lives on a daily basis. We're ready to get started with the Fresh Air Award. Here are the rules to how this show works. Number 1, every panelist will nominate 5 films, each taking turns. There are some overlapping nominations, so when we are done hearing the 5 nominations from each person, everyone will rank the other panelist's nomination that they want to move into the final round. In the final round, each panelist will have one of their nominations represented, leaving 4 total films in the finals. We'll then give our last arguments for a particular movie, then rank the finalists. From this, the Fresh Air Award will have been selected. Kevin, what's your first 1940s film nominee for the movie that pushed cinema forward the most?
I'm going to start everything off with Citizen Kane. Citizen Kane is a movie you have to watch twice. And it's not because the film's plot is too complicated for modern viewers. It's that at this point, Citizen Kane is the stuff of myth. And the myth can easily eclipse the film. No 4 words can ruin a movie-going experience like greatest of all time. Because how does anything live up to that? The first watch, even for seasoned moviegoers, is simply a necessary rinse, where you scoff and mutter the words, greatest, under your breath. I want to talk to those people specifically out there who've had that experience and who got to the end of Citizen Kane and thought, sure, this is fine. You really need to watch it again. Leave the baggage and the expectations at the door and watch it as a movie that is as relevant to America today as it was over 80 years ago. Forget the technical stuff. It's the story of Citizen Kane that pushes cinema forward into the world of adults, ushering in a new era of complicated character studies. People always point to William Randolph Hearst as the Romana Clef for Orson Welles' Kane character, as if the movie was punching up in a sort of eviscerating biopic of an unscrupulous tycoon. But that's not quite what's happening. There's an important difference between Hearst and the Kane character. Hearst was born rich, while Charles Foster Kane was born poor and became rich. Coming off the heels of the Great Depression, and 7 years before the seminal play Death of a Salesman touched on so many of the same issues, Orson Welles looked us straight in the face and told us the American dream was a lie, the pursuit of wealth is bullshit, and journalist integrity and the democratic system equally so. If these ideas don't resonate with you in 2025, right now, then I posit you don't have any business around Citizen Kane in the first place. But if they do spark something in you, watch Citizen Kane again, because the film is a deep, rewarding valley.
Citizen Kane was a movie that I myself nominated. Orson Welles is going to all the famously innovative techniques. He may not have invented each one. Pauline Kael cited The Power and the Glory as an influence on the nonlinear script, and filmmakers like Jean Renoir had been experimenting with the deep focus long takes. But he took all these disparate elements and he fused them together in a way that made them sing.
Kane was released in May of '41. Citizen Kane's influence was almost immediate. John Huston so admired Wells' willingness to take on power and get away with it, he went into production on Maltese Falcon the next month, June of '41, and already began incorporating some of Kane's techniques. Following those two, the already emerging film noir style continued to evolve, often using deep focus, which is synonymous with Welles and Kane. This is one of my nominations.
You can see the obvious technical achievements from the beginning. And they say that over half of the shots in the film have special effects. They're not mind-blowing special effects. It's not Marvel where you're like, wow, you can't do that in real life. He used a lot of visual effects to make his smaller budget go further. And there are so many other little camera tricks that just makes the movie seamless. One of my favorite ones is going through the window on the roof to start a scene. As the thunder and the rain pours, we see Charles Foster Kane's ex-wife in the neon lights. It blurs her and makes her distraught. It's just a way to slowly set the tone without saying anything.
It's so heavily stylized, using every tool at the disposal. When we meet the young Kane as an adult, when he's asked about how he's running a newspaper, and he just says, "Oh, I don't know how to run a newspaper. I just try everything I can think of." And Orson Welles didn't know how to make a movie, and he tried everything he could think of, and it's still a touchstone to filmmakers today.
He's a cocky son of a bitch.
He is a cocky son of a bitch.
The legacy of the structure that Welles and writer Herman Mankiewicz design is almost as impactful as the visual style. Velvet Goldmine, Todd Haynes' film, is overt in his structural theft. Thematically, you have films like the recent Brutalist, The Masters, Social Network, at the way the accumulation of power leads to the corruption of character.
This movie contains no taste of vegetables.
They're well blended.
Hey, I like vegetables.
Yeah, I love how we always use that to be like, vegetables are gross.
Oh, man.
Part of the myth, it's not just that this was Orson Welles' first feature or that he got full creative control at a time when that was unorthodox. It's the fact that he exploded onto the scene, pushing the full possibilities of the medium. Because before this kind of cinematic trickery was pretty much reserved for genre films, movies that were breaking with the sheen of naturalism.
Citizen Kane was considered financially disappointing at the time, and although film is a business, it's often thought of as a short-term business, but copyrights don't run out for 70 years after the author's death. And Citizen Kane is still making money today. It shows us that a film's worth is much more than just its success at the box office. I don't usually like to argue against any particular film that people nominate here, but I think this one is a colossal giant, and I think we need to knock it down a peg. I love the first 30 minutes. The intrigue that they throw out with the documentary reel, I get so excited. The scene when he's a child, all of that brings me into the story. But really, it's a slag after that, watching a rich person whining. And despite, Kevin, you said, oh, he wasn't born rich. Who cares? Like, you're rich. You can do anything you want. For instance, the introduction of Rosebud, and that's what he's saying on his deathbed, just go buy another fucking sled. He even had it in his house, and he can go fucking sledding again. It's not a big problem. So Citizen Kane is just a rich man who tortures his wife twice, and then we're supposed to feel sorry for him because he wants to be poor. Charles Foster Kane ran a yellow journalism column and was unkind to both of his wives. So, there you go.
Without going into an entire long diatribe about unlikable main characters, I think Orson Welles is very interested in villains, and all of his films, he typically plays the villain role. Most of his films, the villain is the central figure of the film, and yes, part of that is allowing yourself to feel sympathy for a villain. It engages us in a way that is meant to say it's neither this or that and make you feel uncomfortable about it.
But I think it does take a position in, like, we're supposed to idealize with what Citizen Kane says that he believed in, but he didn't live his life that way. And that, I think, is a central problem of Citizen Kane. And in future nominations, you'll see other films that do the opposite, where you see a main character who says and does what they believe in, despite money.
To the extent that I think he's supposed to be a sympathetic character, the movie underlines a lot of his faults. Sometimes his faults are with building up Susan Alexander. She kind of throws an offhanded, oh, I like to sing. And she doesn't say, I want to be a star on the stage of the opera. But because he has this desire to be like, well, they screwed me over and used this not even relationship at the time to tar my political career and ambitions. So now I'm going to use my money and wealth to make her do this. And it kind of corrupts her. It kind of ruins her life because she was happy before he came along. And then it destroys him.
With Kane, especially in those like younger years, he's expressing this idealism, the whole Rosebud thing. It is the central fork in the road for him. That was the day when his new guardian whisked him away. What would his life had been if that had never happened.
It's presented in a way where that's the only fork in his life that somebody else controlled. And that's how we're presented Kane as a character. Our parents control our life more than we do.
And it's not just the parents, because he obviously acquires the newspaper and acquires a position of great wealth. But even within that, he only has so much influence on the world. His political campaign famously fails because of what's discovered by Susan Alexander. And as the years press on, he builds Xanadu, which, whether he's aware of it or not, is this gilded cage where he just withers away into irrelevance.
If we set aside that if Citizen Kane is great or not, I'll remind Justin, this isn't about greatness, this is about influence. And the influence is undeniable of Citizen Kane. It echoes through the years.
Yes. Okay. So, JR, do you want to move us on past the most famous film in all of cinema?
Sure. And since this movie was already hinted at in my bio, I figured this might as well be the time to bring it up. My next nomination is Fantasia from 1940, a Walt Disney production from a gaggle of directors. The original plan was to create a version of the Silly Symphonies. We discussed one of the Silly Symphonies, Flowers and Trees, in our 1930 edition. The goal was to make the ultimate Silly Symphony, full color, a new design for Mickey Mouse. Costs were going up, and it was then that Disney decided, you know what, maybe we should do this as a feature. What ultimately developed was an anthology of multiple selections from the classical music canon. You have dips into a fairy realm with the Nutcracker Suite. You go to prehistory. The furthest experiment that Walt Disney did, at least in the feature realm, so experimental that it befuddled audiences.
I've been doing this podcast for like 4 years, and almost every time I talk about how much I love movies and music together. And this is such an incredible example of that. It's Disney saying, here's everything animation-wise we've discovered how to do thus far. And it's essentially going to become the Bible to Disney for the next 50 years. You can see bits of Fantasia in almost every single feature Disney film until the 70s. It's really a delightful watch, whether you are or are not watching it under the influence of chickenpox.
As opposed to other things.
Yeah.
Just to speak on the surround sound, Disney called the process Fantasound. It had to be manually done. So they had to build special theaters to house the surround sound. People were under the stage manipulating the stereo speakers in real time. It was extremely cost prohibitive, and the movie financially did not do super well until they re-released it. And the movie went through many edits. Now you can see the entire film, but for a long time, it was extremely truncated. The sound was mixed differently. At one point, a completely new score accompanied it.
I was kind of struck this time at how cool the live action scenes were. Like, just the colors are so vibrant and bold. I remember being kind of bored at those parts when I was younger, but...
I was going to say, yeah, you found it interesting because you're old.
yeah, exactly.
I felt the same way.
I was just like, whoa, this is like actually kind of cool. It was at least much better than my memory.
Those setups, they're really important to make it a family film, the Disney brand, to have parents and kids watch a film together. It's exactly what their audience wants. And I gotta say, it was so much fun to watch with my 3-year-old kid, and The Apprentice was my favorite when I was a kid, obviously because Mickey is there. But I thought it was so smart that they have Mickey come out and talk after his scene. It gives the kids what they want after seeing a silent Mickey Mouse, and on top of that, he becomes an actor in a role. He's even more real and less like the flawed character we just witnessed him playing, keeping on brand for Disney, protecting that image. My 3-year-old son never ceased to be interested. He talked about the dinosaurs, each animal that came out. A lot of people say the most pure form of cinema is without dialogue. Now, I don't really agree with that, but I always applaud people who can pull it off, because it's not easy not to use dialogue and be that effective in storytelling. And obviously Disney is a master at that, and they show all of their skills here.
I like that you talked about it being age appropriate, because I feel like it is kind of very adult, especially like the Bacchanal scene. The final devil sequence is quite frightening.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
I couldn't.
yeah.
I wasn't able to give myself the courage to watch that in full until like high school. That was that's one of my favorite childhood traumas.
My 3-year-old loved it. He loves dark stuff, and I think that's one thing people protect their kids so much now. But you think of Hansel and Gretel and Hans Christian Andersen, which we were going to be talking about later. That dark stuff, kids love it because they were taught in storytelling what to be afraid of.
My oldest sister, she has 3 kids. We introduced them to like Fantasia. They were transfixed by it, and they also had like no problem watching The Devil. So I guess I'm just weird, but we knew that.
I mean, to that point about them being more willing to push the bounds of what children's entertainment was, I haven't seen it since it came out, but have any of you rewatched Fantasia 2000 recently? Because I feel like that would be a good comparison of what we give kids now versus what they were giving them then.
There's a thesis paper if I've ever heard one.
Yeah.
Cecil, let's hear your first nomination.
So my first pick that isn't Citizen Kane, Hell's a Poppin'. Hell's a Poppin's a 1941 comedy in which 2 knuckleheads, Chick and Ollie, attempt to adapt a movie version of their Broadway show. But as they're adapting it, they fear it's becoming too typical a Hollywood musical review, and so they spend most of the running time attempting to sabotage the very film we're watching. It has stop motion, synchronized swimming, romance, Shemp Howard, a bear on a scooter, Frankenstein, and just when you're thinking this movie has everything but the kitchen sink, they throw in the kitchen sink. I first saw it with an introduction by Joe Dante, who had used it as a template for Gremlins 2, the projector breaking down scenes in both films as a giveaway. Hell's a Poppin' DNA is all over Blazing Saddles and other Mel Brooks films. So whenever I see an anarchic comedy now, I think of Hell's a Poppin'. You can see this more cynical side of it in films like Deadpool and Wolverine. This is what David Denby called corporate irony, in which there's a spoof without a target. A movie's busy winking and nodding at the audience about how bad it is, so it doesn't actually need to be good.
Hell's a Poppin', the play, was designed to be this immersive spectacle. Like, the comedians aren't just up there on the stage. They're in the audience. They're in the lobby. You gotta look behind your back, because there might be someone there.
A play to the screen, that's not an easy thing. That is impressive. Adapt something like that that's specific to one form, one art form, and successfully adapt to another when it was boundary pushing in theater, and have it being boundary pushing in film where you can't create that personal connection in the same way. That's incredibly impressive.
And to make the new medium essential to the joke of the film.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I was the guy who nominated Duck Soup in the 30s, and in many ways, this takes the Duck Soup baton and runs with it, because Duck Soup demolishes narrative. This goes further, demolishing narrative and form. The bit that I remember is a throwaway gag when the image of the film gets out of alignment with the screen. You see the bottom of the screen at the top, and the top at the bottom, and like the actors immediately start playing with it, because why let an opportunity for a joke go to waste?
What is perhaps the most important part of the film's legacy is the iconic Lindy Hop sequence. And it's just one of the single greatest dance scenes ever filmed. In a bit of ironic justice, the sequence was designed so that it could be cut out of the film for Southern audiences in America. But because it has none of the white nonsense of the movie itself, it now stands on its own as the most famous part of the film and is frequently shared on YouTube, TikTok, everywhere. Martha Raye, who is probably the best performance in it. She is so funny. The movie's kind of insulting her, it's like slut-shaming her constantly and pretending that she's not this incredible force.
There's a Citizen Kane joke in this movie, a Rosebud joke, and it's the same fucking year Citizen Kane came out. So that's how quick they were getting the jokes flipped. Another funny thing is, this movie was nominated for an Oscar for a song called Bigfoot Pete, and it's a song that's not in the film. And they mixed it up in the official ballot. It's from another film that came out like a previous year, and it's still on record as Hell's a Poppin', Bigfoot Pete Oscar nomination, even though that's nowhere in the film, and I think that is really apt for this particular
so appropriate.
film.
I don't think I knew that. That is perfect.
I think great job, movie producers.
Yeah,
You know?
in the cartoon nature, the movie, a spoiler for Hell's a Poppin', but it ends with him getting shot for having written the film. And but then he just spews water out like that because he's drinking water and just spewing it out in such a cartoon way. It's so good.
The original director, H.C. Potter, didn't even create this. He reportedly was upset. The producer, Alex Gottlieb, assigned a new director, Eddie Klein, to shoot new scenes with the fictitious projectionist. Then Potter commented that, quote,
A lot of things I had worked very hard on, innovations, were after I had left Universal, gone completely. I screamed and yelled bloody hell, but there was nothing I could do about it. Watching a movie like that, where it's that insane, that off the wall, that different, and the director's still upset that he didn't get all of his ideas in, you want to see the outtakes of that. You're like, where is the Criterion edition of this film?
What wasn't allowed in this?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, the original idea was that when the characters talk to the projectionist, there would be no cut to the projectionist. It would be as if they were talking to the specific projectionist in your theater. And so it is like a truly innovative idea that, I mean, all the Shemp stuff is great and it still works, but there is something to be said about that original idea of just being as if they were talking to someone who was behind you in reality.
This is how I feel about the movie, if you wanted to know, Kevin. One reviewer said, and I think he wraps it up for me, if there's nothing memorable to take away after the show, it is at any rate enjoyable while it lasts.
That's very fair, yeah. If you can see it in a theater with a crowd, it's a more full experience than watching in a muddy YouTube video Home Alone, even though I've done that multiple times.
It also should be noted, this movie has been out of circulation for a while due to legal issues regarding ownership of the play and stuff like that.
All right, let's move on to my first nomination. I do believe, Cecil, you also did this one, right? I'm going to do Thief of Baghdad. Thief of Baghdad was shot over 2 years on 2 continents. It was originally set as an operatic musical. The lead creative in charge of this film was producer Alexander Korda. And my goodness, there are a lot of film historians that have a lot to say about Korda. Korda was known for putting together the famous Powell and Pressburger, who we'll talk about later in this podcast. He wanted us to believe in the magic and the beauty of the impossible. And he did so, Korda, by bringing back excess, fantasy that we saw in the silent epics of the 1920s and 1930s. This highly ambitious film was directed by 3 directors, Ludwig Berger, Tim Whelan, and Michael Powell. The film is incredibly beautiful, not just the sets, not just the costumes, but beautiful people. Thief of Baghdad led to the first use of chroma keying, which is now more commonly known as green screen or blue screen. The genie superimposition of smoke via the chroma key looks almost like a kid trying it for the first time in high school.
So you can see like the little blue outlines over like the galloping horse, whatever, but it adds to the charm.
Not only do they use green screen replacement of backgrounds, but they took the time to have the object of the green screen go behind another object. This shows depth in the scene, and it's evidence that they didn't take shortcuts to tell the story. What shouldn't be forgotten as well is this film didn't solely rely on green screen. Alexander Korda was telling the story that he best could with all the cinema tools, plus invented some.
I also nominated Thief of Baghdad. I was watching a lot of the extras on the Criterion channel of this film, and almost every interview about The Thief of Baghdad, Scorsese, Coppola, special effects legend Dennis Muren, kept mentioning that it used to play on TV over and over and over again in the 50s. So all these little boomer Hollywood filmmakers are just absorbing this movie. You can see it in its influence in Coppola's playful effects in Dracula, in Scorsese's Hugo, and in Star Wars. And its DNA is just all over the Indiana Jones. From the setting of the Lost Ark to the kid's sidekick in Temple, to old men in a cave who have been trapped for 1,000 years in Last Crusade. I've also been watching Pee-wee's Playhouse with my 2-year-old, and the coloring and style of its genie Jambi is clearly a nod to this Korda film. In December, I saw a screening of Flash Gordon, which was 40 years after Thief of Baghdad, and it was striking how little the effects had advanced in that time, and it really looked like they could have been made 2 years apart in terms of the effects. There's all these occasional moments of actual violence, and for some reason, the one that got me was the slashing of the guard's face. They're legitimately intense and just pop in contrast to those lighter fantasy elements. We talked about Citizen Kane as the auteur movie of director with complete control. And so this is clearly more the classical producer as auteur film. It's so vast in scope, exciting set pieces. Korda had multiple directors working at the same time to put it all together. In terms of legacy, this is kind of how we understand Kevin Feige's control of the MCU. And just to close out my section, it might have had a little influence on Disney's Aladdin too, just a little bit.
What hasn't been mentioned yet is Sabu, the actual thief of Baghdad.
Sabu, I think it's partially his childlike height and his innocence that gives him that charisma. He's sort of like a
Tom Sawyer in a different setting, getting into trouble all the time.
Yes. He was like pretty much the only person of color star in England in the 40s. And while his character is nominally the sidekick to the prince, he is brave, he is fun-loving, he's adventurous, he is allowed to be a full personality.
And I gotta say, I think he has as much screen time or more than white protagonists.
He's clearly the star of the film.
But it turns in the middle.
Yeah.
You know, I think that's what's interesting.
I do wonder if there's some sort of racist element behind the splitting of the character into two people, because originally the Sabu character and the lead are one character, and in this they're two separate characters, so like a lead and a sidekick, where the white man gets to have the sexual affair while like Sabu does not.
And I think it's important to talk about the lack of the Middle Eastern people, especially the women in the film. I mean, the lead woman is white, and on top of that, Sabu is not Middle Eastern as well. He's Indian. That doesn't bother me as much in these historical films as it would today, and part of that is it wasn't as easy as travel. We weren't as diverse in the United States or have this globalization, and the story might not have been told if it weren't whitewashed. So I do think that's something that we often forget nowadays when we look back at history. The world was less connected, but still today the film feels inauthentic for that reason.
Yeah.
And for instance, the movie uses exoticism as an excuse to show more skin on women and men, even though I don't know if it's fitting. We don't know the culture, and so flesh on screen feels more innocent in fashion than, let's say, a G-rated movie set in the United States or something like that.
This full fantasy world, which isn't set in the real Arabia so much as it is an idea of an Arabia or a dream of an Arabia. And it's this pure fantasy world with all sorts of sensory delights, things to see or smell or taste.
The film also uses a lot of rich Disney-like sound effects, throwing objects, running down the steps. This movie is one of the most enduringly popular movies of all times. It's been put in theaters 12 different times, and it still sells out. It's not as ubiquitous as The Wizard of Oz, but it still connects 80 years later.
The next movie that I nominated for this little competition is Cat People from 1942, produced by Val Lewton and directed by Jacques Turner. They gave story editor Val Lewton a B-picture unit to start cranking out horror movies under 3 specific rules. Number 1, they could only cost so much money. Number 2, they had to be under 80 minutes in length. And the most bizarrely specific rule, they had to use titles that were given to Lewton from the top brass. And Cat People was the first of the Val Lewton chillers. It was innovative within the horror genre. We're not in the woods of Transylvania. We're not in a castle where people are being assembled before our eyes. We are in a modern urban America. But there's all sorts of ominous omens lurking in the background. One of the standout sequences, these moments of the uncanny, is during this wedding, this woman, we're told that there's this myth from where she grew up in Serbia of people who turn into cats when they're excited or angered or aroused. And we're given all these hints that maybe this is actually happening. There's the famous sequence, may have invented the jump scare. The tension is building and building and then psst. Was that a cat? No, it's a bus.
Val Lewton really tried to do horror against horror types, and one of the people helping him with that was editor Mark Robeson, who he stated about the jump scare, quote, that he put a loud sound of air brakes on so it knocked the viewers out of their seats.
And it's effective because it plays on, our own minds playing tricks on us. The whole movie really revels in that suggestiveness and the suggestions that Irina may be a cat person. And if she's not a cat person, we still have jealousy and lust and anger lurking.
JR, I just want to say I love that whenever you do dialogue from a movie, you act it out.
I'm a ham.
It's wonderful. I always enjoy it. One of the interesting things about this is it did really well when it came out. It grossed more money than Citizen Kane for RKO. It's an interesting little tidbit. Yeah. But it was largely forgotten through most of the 60s, 70s, and 80s until it received new attention when Scorsese started championing it in his Journey Through American Movies that got released in the 90s. And then all of a sudden people were like, hey, this Scorsese guy knows what he's talking about.
And a lot of queer critics were giving it a resurrection at the time too, kind of seeing the coming out narrative, and especially the Moya Sestra part as like a recognition of, hey, I know you're my type.
The cat people really reflected the growing sense and the awareness of homosexuality. There were rumors at the time that the film was about lesbians, and that probably drove a lot of people to see the film as well. As everybody knows, sex sells.
Citizen Kane and Magnificent Ambersons both were expensive movies that didn't make back their money. It's part of why RKO was like, this Orson Welles guy's out, Val Lewton, you're in. Here's some titles to make Universal-esque movies, which he kind of went against.
The other thing that I heard that was funny about the release is that people would start meowing at the beginning of the film, which I thought was pretty fun.
I got to see it in a theater
cool.
for this, and the audience was like really into it. It was great.
I thought you nominated it as more of a beginning to a cult film, that kind of idea, because it's really an early thing that kind of has that offishness vibe.
Yeah.
And I think part of what helps it as a cult film is it works with the grain and against the grain. Like if you're watching it at the time where this character, whose name, to be clear, the character's name is Oliver Reed. He's like, I'm just an old-fashioned American Oliver Reed, and I'm, and he's like grading. But at the time, it was to like set up that, oh, this isn't a Transylvania monster. This could happen to you. But watching it now, it's like, this guy sucks.
Yeah, absolutely.
He's introduced in the movie trying to impress her by making a basket in the trash, and she totally ignores him. She's like, I don't care about your nonsense. They take her to a museum and they're like, you don't want to see this, it's too. And she's like, no, I like these little boats, I want to see this. And he's like, no, trust me, I know better than you. And so you're kind of rooting against him and for her.
My wife, who watched a lot of these 40s movies with me, we had like a running joke about how all the good, interesting men were off in the war. Because I feel like a lot of movies in the 40s, you're seeing these like B-roll male leads. You're like, who is this guy? He is not entertaining.
A lot of the people for the film were interviewed. They talk about Simone and how they cast her for her little kitten face. To me, she kind of looks like Kelly Clarkson. She's just like a girl next door. Simone is so expressive that you never don't really like her, and you know that she's the cause of all this weirdness and these problems.
There's this innocence about her in the movie that really endears you to her.
This was her only lead film in her career. Simone and Jack Turner collaborated so well to bring out enough cat-like tendencies to the character Irina to sell the story. There is a shot that I really like where she's kind of pawing over the couch, and she's just acting just enough like a cat that you're thinking about it. And obviously with the great title that they came up, the whole story is based on, you're thinking about, where are the cats? Where are the cats? She presents that in every scene. And I think that sells the movie more than anything.
Where are the cats that's every time I watch a movie. I'm like, where are the cats?
One other thing that was fun, they recorded live cats for the sound, but they also hired a professional live cat sound maker as an actress, which is pretty fucking fun. So.
Man, I chose the wrong career path.
Yeah, right?
I have a BA in cat sounds. Wow.
It was a very, very contentious set. The two women leads did not get along at all. Simone was known to be very jealous of almost all women around. Jane Randolph accused her of spilling coffee on her to prevent her from doing a scene. Simone, she got along with Lewton, and it was well liked by almost everybody. He overworked himself, so much so that he actually died of a heart attack in his mid-40s. Robert Ebert actually talked about the film, and he said, it's frightening and eerie in a mysterious way that's hard to define, with an undertone of sexual danger. He included this movie as a landmark in American cinema. This once B movie is now a part of the renowned Criterion Collection, which, you know, means something to us cinephiles, I think.
Hell yeah. I love it. For my second film, I chose Children of Paradise by Marcel Carné from 1945. If you've been following along with this podcast since we started these awards, you'll know that the first 4 decades of film progress have been largely viewed through the lens of technical innovations. We always talk about this movie pushed cinema forward because of things that it did technically. We're starting to see films that offer something extraordinary in what they represent. The plot of Children of Paradise is quite a complicated one, involving a love pentagon between a dazzling woman played with a sophisticated sensuality by actress Arletty and her four suitors, a Lothario, a mime, a thief, and a count. The movie's twists and turns unfold with such a Dickensian sense of rhythm, place, and character that by the time you arrive at the heartbreaking finale, you feel like you've been wading through some rarefied dream, where every line of dialogue and every carefully constructed set exuded poetry. Children of Paradise speaks directly to what it means to be a human being. And what more, it was filmed over a period of 2 years under the Nazi occupation of France, where resources were exceedingly scarce and cast and crew were in dangers. When the movie finally premiered, just months after the occupation lifted, it was a resounding success, a triumph of the tenacity of art in the face of war.
The French often consider Children of Paradise as the best film ever made, which means the country that created cinema may believe that this is the best film ever.
Truffaut would later claim that he would have traded his entire oeuvre for making Children of Paradise.
It's the only movie that ever made me appreciate mimes, which I think is important. The audience's hero is obviously Baptiste in Children of Paradise. He's based on the Bohemian mime Jean-Gaspard Dubureau. His character served as a romantic, decadent, and symbolist example of early modernist theater. So there's a lot of theater history set into this piece. It was actually financed by Italian companies during the war, and it was one of the costliest films in French history, made at the end of a time when people were desperate. It's written by Jacques Prévert. Prévert is considered one of the greatest poets and screenwriters in France's history of their written word, at least in modern times. I mean, they have a million great writers, but he is very highly regarded. I'm obviously a huge Jacques Prévert fan. I have his book here on my desk. I quoted him at my wedding. He really hated melodrama. And as you know, in early cinema, melodrama was all over the place. So he fought a lot of these cliches. The script was written during the Nazi occupation and was actually pre-approved by the Nazis, which obviously affected his writing content choices.
Even today, we have, in terms of the mime and the actor, the soft boy and the fuck boy. And so you have like the soft boy who's like, no, I want to make love to you and I don't want it to be special. And then the fuck boy then comes in and is like, well, if you're not going to do it, I'm here.
Of the four men, three of the men are artists of some sort. The one man who is not an artist is easily the least likable. This is a story about the arts. This is a story about love. This is a story about how one can express love in so many ways through art. Is there anything more French than that? I mean, honestly. Garance, the woman in the film, played by Arletty, loves him almost immediately as an artist. But he wants more. He wants that absolute romantic love that you dream about and that you write about, the first love feeling. He struggles with that and leads to the demise and the unhappiness of the struggling artist in the end. A huge focus of the story is how these artists, our main characters, deal with making their art great. Audiences couldn't help comparing what they saw on stage in the theater with what was happening in the rest of the story. They do it so many times throughout the film. It's not just one huge reference. You're getting pieces to make you take pause and think about what the artists are trying to tell you.
We will talk about Italian realism later, and it's interesting to contrast the two styles, whereas poetic realism is sort of like a heightened cinematic grit, which is, this is true, but what if it was also beautiful? It's just like an interesting slight difference between the two styles, but they're both sort of purporting to be more realistic and more grounded in actual struggles of people.
And I like to think of it as like, yes, this is true, but what if it could be truer?
Oh, yeah, I love that, yeah.
The emotional realism rather than a literal realism.
Yeah, exactly.
What if it could be truer?
We're always in the middle of World War II in this decade. It is the biggest event that affected everything. And this film was held up to be released to coincide with France's liberation in World War II. They did that because there were people who worked on the film who weren't allowed to be credited because of the occupation. And I think that's pretty amazing in itself.
Yeah, working in secret.
France put a lot of pressure on women who had affairs with Nazi occupiers, and she had an affair with a soldier. And after liberation, instead of targeting actual war criminals, they targeted people like her, and they ended up shaming her and publicly shaved off her hair. Her career was sidelined.
Yeah, it's a shame. Her performance in the film is truly magnificent. It's like one of my favorite performances from the decade, and she has such a star quality to her.
That's without a doubt. You can't take your eyes off of her.
Yeah.
Moving on to one of my favorite films and a masterclass in directing. The movie is simple, straightforward, but every second amplifies the story message. And that movie is Vittorio De Sica's The Bicycle Thieves. The film impresses not just pushing cinema forward, but pushing storytellers forward. Like Children of Paradise, there is nothing that feels out of place or doesn't feel seamless, and there is no scene that doesn't affect future scenes in the film. For instance, Bicycle Thieves starts and ends with a crowd. De Sica sets up the story establishing how desperate poor workers are to have a job. We see a crowd begging for one job, and eventually our main character, Antonio, is the lucky guy who gets it. But wait, there's one condition. He must have a bike in order to accept. Something small, but something that we can't forget. It's the title of the film. We see on his face that he doesn't currently have a bike, so he lies. We can also see that he has a plan how he's going to get that bike. We follow him home to see him and his wife making sacrifices, selling their own bed sheets to obtain the bike needed to get them out of destitution, setting the stakes as well as any story I may have ever seen.
Have to sell their linen to get the money. They take it and put it up on this end of Raiders of the Lost Ark level thing where there's all of this stuff piled up. And so you just see this abundance, and what they don't have echoed and magnified by what everybody else is just sitting around.
Yeah. That scene is such a great example of the humanity that JR mentioned before too, because the guy at the pawn shop gives them that extra 500 lira for the bed sheets, and then they have tons of bed sheets. In no way is that a good deal for the pawnbroker, but they're like, hey, I'm doing this for you as a person.
The camera stays just long enough for the next person in line to show up and start his transaction. Even though you're focused on this father and son, there's all sorts of little moments that remind you that these two are part of this wider world.
And neorealism is about community. It is about poor people, not poor person. A representation through specific stories of something a lot of people were going through at the time.
There's a line in a film we're going to talk about later, The Red Shoes, where one of the main characters says, it's worse to have to steal than to be stolen from. That runs through my mind the entire time that I watched The Bicycle Thieves.
Bicycle Thieves was not the first neorealistic film, but it is the one that people talk about the most, the one I hear about the most, and the one that I want to talk about the most.
Glad to hear you say that you still hear it talked about, because I feel like in my perception, it slipped a little bit.
That might be true.
This was one of my nominations as well. Originally, when the Sight and Sound poll came out, it was #1. And then in the 90s, it was #6 in 2002. And in the most recent poll, it's down to 41. Now, again, 41, I'm not saying that it's not unappreciated, just that it's slipping a little. My hypothesis is that because it's so influential, it's this quiet, intimate, small-scale film with controlled direction and precise mise-en-scène. It's this solid template that invites and rewards imitation. So you have its ripples in films from directors like Ken Loach, Mike Leigh, Jafar Panahi, and it continues to provide a template for modern indie filmmakers like the early Ramin Barahi movies, Kelly Reichardt, Alice Rohrwacher, so on. And these are all people that did it well.
Bicycle Thieves very much affected Sergio Leone's films and Satyajit Ray, who is considered the greatest Indian director of all time.
One of its key aspects of its legacy is that the script became the template for Pee-wee's Big Adventure, which is one of my favorite films ever. So
With the Italian neorealist movement in full flower, you feel like you're actually in this environment. There's this very gentle humanism that always leans up to the edge of being sentimental, but never crosses that line. And the actual job the father gets that he needs the bicycle for, it's putting up movie posters.
Yeah.
It's putting up advertisements for an escape that we're not given.
And what is the movie? I forget.
I think it's Gilda.
It's Gilda. Yes,
Gilda,
yes,
yes.
it is Gilda. The Gilda thing is so perfect because especially if you've read about Rita Hayworth, this Hispanic woman with dark hair, they plucked her hairline to pull it back because they thought it was too much, dyed it red. She had to go under voice training. She had to play this part of Rita Hayworth. And this image is the one that he's plastering up, this fake manufactured Hollywood beauty that covers up the reality.
A beautiful juxtaposition of this dream world of American cinema and the stark reality of post-war Italy.
Yeah.
The film is called Bicycle Thieves. The titles, which I think are so important, people don't use titles like they did in the 1940s today. We're thinking about that the entire time. Who are these thieves? When are they going to strike this guy whose family is sacrificing so much for a bike? It creates tension immediately when Antonio goes upstairs to see the soothsayer. They have the bike in each shot perfectly framed before Antonio finally wants to go see what his wife is doing because he kind of knows in his head she might be wasting money. She's been here before. And then masterfully, De Sica creates a heartwarming scene right after you don't see the bike for the very first time. He left it outside the door unattended. And during that time, he sets up Antonio's value on money when he denounces this soothsayer's treachery. You don't need to spend money on that, wife. This pays off later in the movie when you eventually see him waste money on the exact same thing because he feels so desperate. This combination of tension and character development amplifies Antonio's absolute desperation and how he gives up his beliefs because he doesn't know what else to do. He has no other options.
So one of the scenes that really stays with me is where they go to dinner, and financially it's an irresponsible decision to make. They shouldn't be spending money on this fancy dinner, but it's such an important moment for them to have, this father and son. I grew up in a Midwestern around white suburban men who would always, well, if they're so poor, how come they have that big TV? Or why do they still get to enjoy life if they're so poor, essentially? I love that the film doesn't criticize them for spending the money on the dinner.
It's the first time that we see his vices. Mm-hmm. He knows that he's not going to have the money. He doesn't go and talk to his wife. He says, your mom's not going to like this, because he knows what's in store. Not just today, but potentially a lifetime. He shows that the first thing that he goes to is beer. He shows his kid, this is how we can connect, having a beer at 8 years old or however old the kid is.
Italians.
It's interesting because both this and Rome Open City have these children characters who have to immediately become adults because of this Italian situation in World War II.
This scene, it's quite a turning place for the movie. We've been told to concentrate on that poverty for an hour. Mm-hmm. And we get thrown the curveball. Not only that, but De Sica doesn't waste time to finally show the contrast of the upper class in Italy. Not everybody in Italy is poor. And we didn't realize that until this moment. During this scene, we see a glimpse at the symbolic emotions from the kids of the upper and lower classes from just a few silent looks, taunting between the two classes together. The final scene where the father and son with no money, after wasting all their cash on that quote-unquote decadent meal, a family unit with all their hope expended over 2 generations. And what makes the film impress upon you when you finish it is the son. Bruno's eyes glazed over with tears as he grabs his hand tighter as he walks into the crowd in the last scene. A lot of times I think movies and people and adults play that kids are unintelligent, and this movie treats them differently.
And one of the scenes that really underscores that is when the kid trips in the rain and he doesn't notice. And he's like, why are you all wet? And he's like, I fell, you weren't paying attention to me, because the dad is so in his own head. And it's like such a reflection on when I think back of the times that I've been stressed out, and as much as I would die for my child, the times where it's like whatever small thing I'm thinking about in the moment overrides that, and I don't notice, like, oh my God, you're playing with a knife.
Your kids, you want to be perfect, to have all the answers, to be strong, but you have this situation where you're forced into this vulnerable position. But to have that happen in front of your son, it's such a devastating moment.
Do you know what I think is amazing, though? There's no bitterness or anger against anyone. Even when we get to the end, we're left with a lack of hope and a sense of despair. The family will have to live out their existence that was difficult at the beginning of the movie and has now become impossible. No redemption, no sequel planned. It's just an unflinching look at what poverty really is. And we could use more of it today.
Yeah, it really heightens the systematic aspect of poverty. The main character, he's set up to fail. If you're going to get frustrated at something, it's this whole system.
Both of the leads were not rich people. DeSica said that trained actors had to forget that they were celebrities, whereas untrained actors were a blank canvas. Mm-hmm. And obviously, he knew what to do with that blank canvas. He knew that these characters would translate to film under his control. DeSica was an actor. The only way movies get made nowadays in the movies in Hollywood is by multimillionaires. There are not poor people making movies. After World War II, when an entire country is facing poverty, people are bound to bind together and continue to tell stories. The neo-realist movement captured that, not just with one film, but a group of films in a single country. All of these stories were led by bicycle thieves.
Is going to be one of my nominations. Jumping off the theme of Italian neorealism is Rome, Open City from 1945, directed by Roberto Rossellini. This film is considered the birth of Italian neorealism. It was made in the rubble of the war. They started shooting in January 1945, just months after, the Nazis had been kicked out. It follows a resistance fighter, a priest, a couple, and we drop in on each of these characters, fighting or collaborating or just surviving underneath the Nazi regime. For me, the most striking thing is that even though it started shooting after victory was assured, it reflects that uncertainty of being in the tunnel, seeing the light at the end, but not knowing if you will make it. And it makes the movie incredibly resonant.
One of the interesting things about doing this podcast is watching so many films from the same era. And the first thing you notice is this is not like any of these other movies. This is raw and violent and blunt about sex and drugs and horror.
Even compared to the one we were just talking about, Bicycle Thieves, which we kind of mentioned, like its precise compositions and everything. And even though they're lumped together as Italian neorealism, they're two very different movies stylistically.
And it's here that we get to the question that has existed for as long as we've had neorealism, which is what does and does not count as neorealism? Is it the use of the locations? Is it the non-professionals? Some of the later neorealist movies, the lines are blurred.
Well, even on this one, the lines are, because the non-professional actors is not a case for this film. And this is undisputedly a kickoff. Neorealism often had non-stars, but it wasn't always the case. They always had non-set locations, and the documentary kind of feel is always there because they're not using landmarks to show you what city they're in. They're showing everyday streets. They're shooting it out on the streets. They're doing a lot of the dubbing afterwards in the studio. Audiences in Italy didn't care a lot of times that things were perfectly in sync. Neorealism is also what you do to avoid suffering. Yet the audience watches characters struggle, waiting for their sufferings to end.
Even if all these actors were brought in from vaudeville, you wouldn't know that actually watching the movie because they all feel so real and lived in.
For several years, cinema and film in general had been in the hands of the fascist propaganda machine.
Yeah.
And a lot of what neorealism was doing was taking that back and making it for the people. What Italian neorealism said was this can be a great tool against oppression.
Not only that, it set it in the box office. People are willing to go and see these things. Being able to empathize is what people want. It is what cinema is made for.
Rossellini himself coming off being a collaborator and making films under the fascist government and then having this yell against it, but also giving a little of the depth and complexities to some of the characters that are a little more morally ambiguous.
This movie was shot only 2 weeks after the occupation ended. Remember that it is that close and that fresh to the feeling of what it was to be under the Nazis.
They shot almost entirely on film they had to scavenge. There were only like 3 different film stocks used during the making of the movie, but because the actual stock itself was developed in such variable conditions.
It adds to the grittiness and to the documentary feel of it, definitely. Less lighting, so it's a little darker than most films. There are probably more grain seen in the films, and it was done that way because not out of a style choice, but because of necessity.
Yeah, it's all caught.
I think the other thing that we'd be remiss to not talk about that is so unique is they kill our main character early in the film. It's a climax of a storyline. There's the central character, the protagonist, this woman who's holding the community up on this male-centered society, and the story after that death moves on. As we learned, there's been too much death, too much despair and struggle in the occupied Italian lives to linger too long on grief. Her death doesn't go wasted because it does instill in the audience a sense of revenge. However, the story doesn't go that way. The characters know that revenge leads to death, and instead we see more resistance throughout the community for the rest of the film.
The lesbian Nazi I found very visually similar to the queer Moya Sestra coded character in Cat People. Like their hair is almost exactly the same. And, you know, watching these pretty close together, I was like, what's going on with these cat queer coded women?
Not as you would think of like a lesbian look nowadays.
Yeah, it's lost to time.
Yeah.
Also important, the images that Rossellini leaves us to watch are young boys who have seen no reward in fighting the system. They walk with their heads hung low in confusion and anger, and they have no idea when this war will end or what this resistance will lead to. As opposed to Bicycle Thieves, which takes a more intimate look at the desperation of poverty that's into the family unit, Rome Open City, despite showing some of the most heartless devastations of war, finishes on the idea that these boys are still going to resist until they're free. Although we might not know what that might look like, it's a resolute message of strength in people, which is not something that you see in all neorealist films. And this was the only neorealist film that went #1 in the Italian box office.
This is the film that's credited with blowing open the foreign film market in the US as well.
Getting us used to reading subtitles and furthermore.
An important part of its legacy, and especially if we want to argue for it as winning this award, no other film can say that Ingrid Bergman saw it, and because it exists, Isabella Rossellini now exists. So there is a direct line between Rome Open City and Isabella Rossellini as part of its legacy.
Yeah.
My next nomination is Meshes of the Afternoon. We keep going back to Meshes of the Afternoon because it's so mysterious, but intentional. It doesn't feel random. I can't explain what every fetishized object symbolizes, but they all add to this calculated and evocative form that make sense as this filmic experience.
Can I say, Maya Deren could tell you what every object meant.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that's very different and unique about the film as compared to a lot of other films that we talk about.
100%. And I think that intentionality shows in the movie. When you're watching it, you don't feel, oh, that's so random, that's so weird. You feel, oh, what does that mean? It draws you in, it doesn't keep you out. More classical surrealism often left a lot to random chance. The Dada is putting things together and collaging. But Darren and other directors like Kenneth Anger, who I think will come up later, made the randomness purposeful. We recently lost David Lynch. We're recording this 2 days after he passed, and his work just so clearly has roots in Darren's films, from doppelgangers, temporal layering, objects infused with meaning, all of this stuff from Fire Walk with Me, Inland Empire especially, is very rooted in Darren's films. Music video directors from the 80s on use this as a very clear template. Later, feminist avant-garde directors like Sue Friedrich. I also want to end this by recommending the incredible Marcus Penn. He has this ongoing series, The School of Maya Deren, on his Penland Empire blog. And it features side-by-side GIFs comparing images of Darren's films right alongside images from directors that she inspired. So there are a lot of chapters on Lynch, but he also shows her influence on the work of Julie Dash, Curtis Harrington, and even recent films like Skinamarink and Innie's Man. It's a great way to see how strongly Meshes has become enmeshed with the past, present, and future of film.
It feels like you're watching someone's thought patterns play out on screen. You keep circling back to a moment. It keeps slightly changing. It retains this essence. It's like an intrusive thought you want to put away, but it keeps coming back.
And that repetition creates new connotations based on the previous film frames. Things that you don't even notice subtly is there's a scene where she pushes against the wall and it triggers the camera to move in that direction, almost as the camera's a part of her body. It's another way to know that the film is a part of her psyche. The movie skips from objectivity to subjectivity without transitions or preparations. This was so well thought through and so seamless that you get something new from watching the short film over and over again, which I think the best short films do.
Yeah.
It's as if she's building the rules as the film goes on. It exists within its own pyramid of knowledge and ideas.
She broke continuity. She broke realism. She's looking at herself a lot of times.
The shot where she sees herself is directly used later at the end of 2001.
Yeah.
So...
Yeah.
I was looking through the Marcus Penn thing, and he has that, a lot of the comparisons with 2001.
Who doesn't list Maya Deren as an influence? She's made 75 separate shorts. This is undisputably the best one. There's not a more influential short in the history of cinema. People watch this in film school, in whatever film history class, and it gives you so many ideas. It makes you realize what you can do with almost no money. All you need is a film, a camera, and objects in your house.
The way that it deals with female sexuality, female interiority, and self-pleasure, along with violence and the transactional nature of sexuality, is really blunt and unprecedented.
Maya Deren dominated the first decade post-war in the United States for avant-garde cinema. Meshes of the Afternoon won the Grand Prix International Avant-Garde Film in the 1947 Cannes Film Festival. The film is in the public domain and has been for a long time just because of copyright notice laws.
It's in the same way that we were talking earlier. John Huston saw Citizen Kane and then infused a lot of Maltese Falcon with that. Anger was actually making movies before. Then he saw her and was like, oh, this is what I should be doing.
It's like the spark of the zeitgeist in a way.
Speaking of Mr. John Huston, I'm going to talk about John Huston's 1946 documentary called Let There Be Light. Let There Be Light is an unflinching look at PTSD, which was then called psychoneurosis. It was commissioned by the military to convince employers to hire returning veterans. But once the Army saw the completed footage, which included soldiers relating horrific experiences, quote, breaking down on camera, they classified the movie, and the film was not shown again to civilians until 35 years later, after it was released under the Freedom of Information Act. Not only did Let There Be Light feature unprecedented candor about the horrific cost of war, it was revolutionary in its form as well, utilizing unscripted interview footage, now cornerstones of documentary filmmakers such as Errol Morris, Ken Burns, etc.
And you get that in a way that is also a precedent to verite documentary that doesn't come until Wiseman comes along 2 decades later. A documentary that was quite ahead of its time in a lot of ways.
In addition, Let There Be Light showcased a racially integrated hospital at a time when the Army was still 2 years away from actual integration in its platoons. And the film features a close-up of an African-American couple kissing, which was completely unheard of in the narrative Hollywood films of the period.
We'll say the war part of the 40s versus the post-war part of the 40s. A lot of the media was being pushed about community and sacrifice. After the war, and especially in light of being anti-communist, it became about individualism and consumption, and how this documentary kind of covers both of those, where you did the community and sacrifice, but now you need to get better to become an individual, to get into the workforce, to buy our products again.
The movie is a must-watch for anyone trying to get a fuller picture of World War II and its after effects. I'd also recommend Leo Hurwitz's incendiary film Strange Victory as a double feature with this about the culture of racism in America following the war.
The government's not just suppressed the film, but they reshot Let There Be Light and made a film called Shades of Grey, whitewashing it, reenacting all the scenes using an all-white cast of actors to recreate the scenes and dialogue from Huston's documentary. The patients who were filmed showed greater progress in recovery than those who were not. It actually has a name. It's called the Hawthorne effect, in which patients respond better when they're observed. It reveals the power of the gaze of an audience and, in a way, the power of cinema.
I first saw this on the Blu-ray of The Master.
Yes.
It was included as a special feature. Paul Thomas Anderson recreated some of the scenes in lifted dialogue. In terms of its legacy, how do you think we receive a movie like this that was suppressed for so long and then had its belated flowering?
PTSD is something that we have been dealing with through war throughout history. We're into the next century and we're still trying to solve that problem. And this is a document about that.
This was a movie trying to address a problem that existed that they didn't want to admit existed.
All right, my next nomination is Van Gogh from 1948. And I could not believe that I saw the Ken Burns effect being used in this film. It absolutely astounded me because Ken Burns was not born when this movie came out. So the moving of the cameras on still photos was popularized by Ken Burns famously in his film Civil War in 1990. But the technique was never used in a film that was recognized widely before Alan Rene's Van Gogh, which won an Oscar for Best Short Documentary because the Ken Burns effect works so well. And I can't believe I'm still calling it the Ken Burns effect, but I don't know what else to call it. They're moving on still pictures.
The Rene's effect.
So yeah, the Rene effect. Let's change it right now. The Alan Rene effect is really a way to construct montages out of still photos, memories of what was oftentimes used before we had motion picture in film to make things move. This film brought back Van Gogh's popularity.
For this documentary, it's doubly effective because the actual images that the camera is panning and zooming in onto are actual canvases, actual things that Van Gogh painted.
This was, for me, the first time I've seen a lot of these images in black and white, except for maybe in some art books. That's one of the dominant things when I think of Van Gogh. I think of the colors. And so it was kind of interesting to see the compositions and the paintings themselves absent that element.
The film anticipates Rene's work in the 50s and 60s, setting up the hypnotic narrative and the editing rhythms that he is going to use in Night and Fog, and Last Year at Marienbad, and Hiroshima Mon Amour.
For my final nomination, we come to the obligatory short, which is 1947's Fireworks, the earliest surviving film from experimental filmmaker Kenneth Anger. He made this as a teenager. It's his own personal expression, unvarnished, unguarded, exploding on the screen. There's an intensity to the homoeroticism. The images of the sailors, candles coming out of people's flies, and I'm sure we all know what that means. It's all the more striking because at this time, homosexuality was something you could go to jail for in the United States. Here's a filmmaker expressing those forbidden urges, putting them on the screen.
Kenneth Anger is not making a, quote, homosexual film. It's a surreal film, and his is a homosexual viewpoint. There is obviously that bit of arch transgressive naughtiness to it that he's in, but he basically is asking for the queerness to be taken for granted. Once that line is accepted, then you can understand me as a whole person, my whole worldview, and all of my dreams, which is, I think, the most important thing.
In this podcast, the Fresh Air Awards specifically, we do talk about dreams a lot, and it's something that cinema seems to explore successfully many times, especially in the short form.
There's so much going on, and it's 14 minutes of running time. I feel like you could watch it 100 times and get 100 different readings of it. It sends up Christian iconography and finds space for a sort of new post-war masculinity, which is a masculinity of the submissive.
I first became aware of Kenneth Anger from this band the auteurs in the 90s, they had a song called Kenneth Anger's Bad Dream. For some reason, that song led me to seek his stuff out, and it really was amazing to see a teenager. Fireworks was one I hadn't returned to. For some reason, the Christmas tree coming through horizontally, it's such a weird image that it's like, what? I don't know.
The myth of this is that Anger made it over the weekend while his parents were out of town. And I just love that idea. Be like, well, mom and dad are gone. Let's just make this subversive dream film.
Yeah. He was able to convince a lot of people to work on it because they thought they were going to make the ultimate porno. Direct quote.
That's funny.
Yeah.
This is really, really influential to loads of underground filmmakers. Most of the people we said who were influenced by Myra Deeren, David Lynch, John Waters, decades to come, Fireworks and Kenneth Anger as a whole represents one of the godfathers of underground cinema.
Kenneth Anger, just like Maya Deren, explored short film throughout his whole career and didn't seem to long to do a feature film. I don't think we have that same kind of attitude or have had that same kind of attitude since the 70s. Think about just animation. Animation lived mostly in short film, even through the rise of Disney's features. Deren and Anger, they weren't just making them for art, it still was a business for them. As raunchy as the film is, he scratched out his genitals in a scene because he thought he wouldn't be able to sell it. Even though Anger never really made a lot of money, Deren wasn't a millionaire. It is a way for artists to make money, which I think we've lost a lot nowadays since people think of short films as a way to launch their career rather than to make a career doing it.
It's hard to take anything Anger says for sure, but allegedly Kinsey was at the first screening and bought a copy. This is a part of the Kinsey body of research.
For those that don't know about Alfred Kinsey, he's the most famous for creating the heterosexual-homosexual rating scale, saying it's on a spectrum. Because of the film, he made a friendship with Anger, and they worked together on future projects.
His use of music is so precise. There's a sequence where there's a bunch of cars in the night with their headlights, and the music cuts out midway through to signal a shift in mood. This uncanny recognition of how music can bring a change in the direction a film is going.
Aside from pushing cinema forward, this film pushed forward the freedom of speech in the United States. On October 11th, 1957, the cinema owner Rahauer was arrested on obscenity charges for showing the film. Rahauer was found guilty, but it was appealed and overturned on the grounds of artistic expression and became a landmark decision for freedom of speech here in the United States. On top of that, he didn't influence just filmmakers. Tennessee Williams called Fireworks, quote, the most exciting use of cinema I have ever seen.
Which definition of exciting?
My next choice, this one is unique, and to be honest, I made room for it since Meshes was already chosen. I couldn't decide because I love this short film a lot. It is very influential. It has won awards, but it's probably not as well known as other films. It's called Beyond Dull Care from 1949. Directed by Norman McLaren and Evelyn Lambert. They were commissioned by the National Film Board of Canada. The film's music was expressed visually with emotion and finesse by painting and scratching directly onto the film stock, which is obviously not how you usually make a film. Director Evelyn Lambert was born in Ottawa. She was hearing impaired from an early age, which helped her focus attention on the visual world as a way of communicating through art. The National Film Board Commissioner in Canada, John Grierson, asked McLaren to form an animation unit in 1943. Lambert was part of one of McLaren's first recruits and the first female animator hired by the board. Lambert and McLaren were an immediate and permanent fit. She was methodical and pragmatic, and he was the creative dreamer. To create the visuals, they stretched out the celluloid and pinned it to a board. An oscilloscope allowed them to see the vibrations and mark them on the film of the sound. So they actually used the shape of the sound waves to make the film. They made sure that it felt and matched the emotional content of the music. And if it didn't, they trashed it and repainted the image and totally had to reanimate every section. They used ink, paint, sprayers, crumpled papers, netting, mesh, and lace as stencils, dust sprinkled onto wet dye so it recoiled from each speck, and that would create crackles in the paint patterns as it dried. The film went on to win Venice Film Festival's first prize. Begone Dull Care was designated preserved as a masterwork by the Trust of Canada, and the Canadian electronic music duo Junior Boys, they named their album Begone Dull Care after the film. Evelyn Lambert was given the Winsor McKay Award, and George Lucas himself has cited McLaren as an influence on his own work. So it is a big, little government-created film.
I was thinking of the 70s Sesame Street animation shorts, like during it, like it was bringing, it was giving me like those vibes.
I'm just so amazed at how brilliant the colors are and how beautiful, just saturated that they turned out when it's like drawn on. I just wonder how it projects through the film and shows that as well.
Yeah, I would love to see this on film, see how it plays.
Oscar Peterson's score is a fantastic piece of jazz music. Drawing directly on film obviously predates all the famous Brakhage stuff that's about to come down the pipe in the 50s. It's really one of those great movies that expands the idea of what a movie can be while reinforcing its universality.
Yeah, it's not hard to watch this movie, I'll say that.
No.
Pure form.
My last film that I picked is The Red Shoes, 1948. It's directed by Michael Powell and Emmerich Pressburger. The Red Shoes is a movie about the art of ballet and, as an extension, the importance of art in general. The plot of The Red Shoes follows a dancer named Victoria Page, played by real-life ballerina Moira Shearer, and her jealous impresario Lermontov, who demands artistic perfection from Victoria at the cost of everything else in her life. Not only anticipating films like Singing in the Rain, but also Fellini's artistic Urtext 8.5, and more recent films like Damien Chazelle's Whiplash. The Red Shoes seems to ask, in the absence of a moral center following World War II, could not art be the most important thing in the world? Co-director Michael Powell is quoted as saying, perhaps a little cheekily, "We had all been told for 10 years to go out and die for freedom and democracy, and now that the war was over, the Red Shoes told us to go out and die for art." And this heady question doesn't even hit at the true joy of The Red Shoes, that it showcases the most fabulous dancing ever put on film. So not only do we marvel at Moira Shearer's natural talent of ballet, but because it's a movie, we're also able to get, as cinema viewers, a glimpse into the interiority of dancing in a way that we would never be able to experience if we were simple ballet patrons watching a dance in real time from seats in an audience. Through the expert use of blocking, editing, and special effects, Powell, Pressburger, and their collaborators imbue the scene with a frenzied, surreal quality that you really need to see to believe. For my money, it's one of the greatest extended sequences in the history of cinema. It makes you want to stand up and applaud the screen because everything that makes movies and art great is in The Red Shoes.
The cool thing about that scene is that they had to argue for that amount of allotted time. And this obviously drew them to the cast of professional dancer. If you're going to have 15 minutes of a dancing scene, you don't want it to turn out shittily or be a pretend Johnny Depp sing on Broadway or something. The original story was written about a kid that wears their shoes to church and then has to have their legs cut off in order to take them off. But this is much more about celebrating the artist and the sacrifice, where they think because they love their art form so much that they're not going to suffer, but in the end you see it anyway, and the dance makes it cyclical and makes it relate to any other artist who ends up watching the film.
I did not nominate this movie, but when I was making my selections, I was very tempted. The ballet sequence, you can see its influence in the dream ballets of American in Paris, Singing in the Rain, and all those 50s MGM Freed Unit musicals.
There's a sense of French impressionism with double exposed moments such as the ocean crashing while the dancer is alone on stage. We view the conductor just off stage. She uses a knife to try to cut off her ballet shoes when it switches to a twig. The twig then turns back into a knife after she gives up trying to cut off her shoes. We realize that the dancer is stuck must suffer through this art, even though it seems to have the ability to kill her.
For me, the key moment of the ballet is one point when we see the character of the shoemaker who sold the girl these shoes that will make her dance to her death. And the movie does a match cut from the shoemaker in position to Lermontov, and you immediately realize what this means. Consciously or not, you realize where this is going to go.
It's such a showstopper.
And it influenced Martin Scorsese's Raging Bull in the boxing scenes is almost directly influenced and taken by the very long dance scene.
Powell actually influenced Raging Bull being shot in black and white because Scorsese shot some test footage of De Niro boxing, and Powell watches it, and Powell's like, okay, yeah, the color on like that gloves, that wouldn't be accurate to the actual time. And between that and Scorsese's awareness of how color film at the time would very quickly degrade, that led to the decision to shoot the majority of Raging Bull in black and white.
Which is interesting because Powell's influence is usually his use of color.
The film as a whole drills so deeply into both the agony and the ecstasy of the creation of art. The first half leading up to that famous ballet sequence, you're submerged in the energy and the excitement of creation, in the victories of making it. And we get to the second half where we dive into the cost of everything. This is really explored through Lermontov. He's the impresario.
He's the Lorne Michaels of the production. He's finding the talent, putting it together.
This enigma about Lermontov. He's dedicated himself to his art at the expense of his humanity. And it's led him to do some shady, borderline monstrous things, but that's something we can also relate to. Would we be willing to take it that far?
And maybe that makes his character so much more desperate because he doesn't have the ability that his performers have. So he's clinging to this idea of greatness that is outside of himself.
He's not jealous of Vicky and Julian when they develop a relationship because of romantic desire on his part. It's jealousy that they have a life outside ballet.
It might be a combination, do you think, or not?
No, I realize
never
this
got
is open
that.
to interpretation, but personally, I don't see it as romantic jealousy.
I find, if anything, Lermontov is coded as gay in the film, but I think that he's beyond sexuality and that he's just obsessed with the work.
That's interesting. I definitely didn't get that vibe. I felt like he wanted her as well, and he used his money to keep them apart.
Well, then the question is, in what way does he want her?
Yeah, and I think that goes to kind of the idea of control and abuse, and that these powerful, controlling men, it's not romantic, it's domineering.
He is obsessed with beauty. She's beautiful, the ballet is beautiful, and he wants to control all things beautiful.
Yeah. And the one to suffer for it is the woman. I came to Moira Shear as an actress in the Powell movies, Tales of Hoffman and Peeping Tom, and so I kind of assumed she was an actress first, but she was actually a great ballerina who got badgered into taking this role, and then it ruined her career because at the time film was seen as not proper in the ballet world.
She also had a difficult relationship with Powell. Michael Powell made films for himself, and Pressburger always thought about the audience. In that way, they were kind of like yin and yang while they worked together. Pressburger always wanted to create a composed film, controlling all the variables and not letting it go wild.
The two live-action feature-length movies that are in color that we've chosen are both Michael Powell joints.
Yes.
No surprise there. It's an art house film that made a lot of money. It was one of the top grossing films in 1948 in the US.
The 40s is the decade of noir, black and white, and we kind of have these two, and Fantasia and Beyond All Care, as our like pops of color.
On a side note, my wife and I just watched Black Narcissus for the first time last night, and that's also amazing. I was just like, holy shit, these Powell and Pressburger folks are really knocking it out the park.
And I don't think they've been copied because their films have a particular look. Whatever film stocks they use, they draw you to the color and they make you pay so much attention to it. The name of the film, again, comes into play here. The Red Shoes. You are concentrated on red the whole time. This film doesn't work the same in black and white. So they're adding an extra dimension. They're using the extra cost to make the film better.
And obviously another film that was a direct result of Red Shoes was the Black Swan. The Aronofsky film is very
Which is
deeply
interesting,
indebted.
because Aronofsky claimed he hadn't seen Red
Yeah.
Shoes at the time.
Oh, that's crazy. I didn't know that. When I watched it, I couldn't not think of this.
Yeah.
Let's move on to my last one. It's a Wonderful Life, 1946, the classic American Christmas film. It's oddly based on Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, although you wouldn't necessarily notice it.
Even now, we introduce it as a Christmas film, and it's got 5 minutes of Christmas in it. It's barely. It begins with our character getting beaten and as a child, and then it's all downhill from there, and that's the good stuff.
Whether it is deliberately based on Christmas Carol or not, this movie does feel like the American response to A Christmas Carol. And it's a way it's an inverse. Instead of a rich man who learns that money isn't everything. He's not poor, but he's not Mr. Potter.
But to spin off that idea, it is almost like the yin to Citizen Kane's yang. Whereas Citizen Kane is a bitter look at where America is heading, Capra still offers up that there's something in it for the little man. All of these values that we say that we have, we still can be a community.
I was raised Catholic. I went to Catholic school. I did know plenty about the Bible. This was made in Christian America in the 1950s. In the opening scene is Joseph, who is the earthly fake father of Jesus. Even though Joseph is well respected, he's rarely brought in to help tell a story. That is a way to do something liberating within a well-known story complex of Jesus, God, and Christianity, but using a character that's maybe less known to tell the story. And here he takes an integral role talking to God about what he needs to do with this character who we're going to be paying attention to. Immediately, God has this specific interest in our main character, who is played by Jimmy Stewart. He's introduced as George Bailey for the first time on screen, and God's voice comes back in and says, quote, "I want you to take a good look at that face." Then the angel says, "That's a good face," and reinforces that this is a person God and biblical idols, they like this person personally, and thus the audience should like them as well. In addition, at this point of the film, the main character, George Bailey, has already saved 2 people's lives by showing selflessness. How can the film not be successful with such a smooth introduction like that?
We get to spend time with George Bailey as he goes through Bedford Falls. And if it wasn't for the little off-screen nudges from the Heavenly Angels, there's nothing to tell you that there's a cosmic dimension that has already come into play. And it allows the movie to build this weight. It cashes in all these chips once we get to the famous ending where Clarence shows George what the world would have been like without him.
Frank Capra is a master of cinema, and just as people think of Spielberg as manipulating emotions, Capra does the same over and over again. He mastered using sound and visual to add depth to the storytelling. Tiny jokes that are sprinkled through the film, like when Mary Hatch asks George Bailey, "What are you doing, picketing?" And at the same time, she's dragging a stick across a white picket fence. Just a little wordplay that it isn't really wordplay, it's visual play.
It's interesting you mentioned Spielberg because I really see Capra's influence in the works of Spielberg, not only in the Norman Rockwell-esque characters and setting, but the way the script flows in the first act so eloquently and how it sets up his characters in these effortless broad strokes of Americana. You're like, what's the most American film? You could maybe be like, It's a Wonderful Life, and you make a really strong case for it.
The best and the worst, yeah.
And the reason it works is that Capra, despite the reputation for sentimentality, he is willing to go darker than people give him credit for. The sequence of George Bailey's bad day, from the loss of the money and the conga line of everything, Jimmy Stewart's performance as a man who's on the brink, it is genuinely harrowing.
We see that he has a limit, and that limit brings him to thinking about suicide, giving up everything that he's fought for his whole life. And why? Because for the first time publicly, he's the bad guy. In the public's mind, he stole everyone's money, and that was never his intention. He couldn't bear it. He cared about his community as much as his family, and it broke him when his community didn't see that. He breaks things, and in doing so, he makes his kids cry. He berates his teacher and her husband. And when he saw himself as the future scorn of the community, that's when he goes to the bridge.
this being like the quintessential most American film, it is good to note that Capra was an immigrant to the United States, and that it maybe takes that outsider perspective to see things clearly as he did. And this is also another post-war film. Both Capra and Stewart are coming off of the war as seeing the worst of humanity. But going from the worst to the best of humanity, one of the things that makes this work is the date with Donna Reed and Jimmy Stewart early on.
So good.
The way they look at each other, the way that they're filmed, because you so fall in love with them in that sequence and you see them falling in love with each other. When she comes back from New York and he's starting to date her again, it allows you to kind of forgive him for being a dick. It carries through to the end, which is almost like a return to that moment. He's loving being himself again for the first time we've seen on screen in a long time. And the angel gets the wings and it's all, I don't know, emotional.
He spent his life giving to this community, putting his own dreams on hold.
Just the way that it's constructed is pretty amazing, especially once they're talking to Mary's boyfriend, seeming to have a normal conversation audibly on the phone. But how it's framed is one long take as a close-up on the two that have to hold the phone
and
together.
Their heads
to
are
listen.
so close together and they're so aware of each other's presence.
They're two destined lovers at that point, and it's just a simple shot. And then that romantic feeling, to say it nicely because it's a Capra film, explodes into a passionate embrace in front of Mary Hatch's mom, who leaves the room in hysterics because of the betrayal. And I think that part is also so slick, the way Capra put it together, because the audience already knows these two are made for each other, but they might feel bad about this cheating on this guy who's innocent off screen. Mary's mom going into hysterics. It lets us laugh at it. It's somebody else feeling that for us. So that's not what Capra wants us to feel, but he recognizes it. She leaves the scene and then we can move on with the story. It's not a big deal.
It's definitely understated just how much comedy is in the movie. Even when we hit Pottersville, there's all sorts of comic touches. When George first meets Clarence, it's snowing out, and then when we enter Pottersville, that alternate universe, it's suddenly not snowing. He experiences Pottersville. He's driven back to the limit again. He goes back to the bridge. He is begging God to live again, and God doesn't say anything. We don't hear his voice, but if we pay attention, we notice the snow has begun to fall. He returns, and it's then that the community bands together to help him. No man is poor who has friends, and he's a man who has friends. Here's to George Bailey, the richest man in town.
As Christmas as it gets.
That's as Christmas as it gets.
You know, we keep talking about George Bailey, and surprisingly, we haven't talked about Jimmy Stewart that much yet. This movie is not It's a Wonderful Life without him. As much as Capra is a genius, Jimmy Stewart is as well. When he was playing this movie, he's 38 years old. That's the age that I am now. No surprise, I felt it the most when I watched it this year. And Stewart has that sort of ageless quality about him. He's that everyman actor, and he comes off as a young kid and an old man at the same time.
Very true.
Yeah.
In terms of its legacy, some movies that I was thinking that attempt to replicate or remix its ingredients of supernatural melodrama, character, comedy, where Albert Brooks is defending your life, Back to the Future, Warren Beatty, Heaven Can Wait, are the three that remind me most of It's a Wonderful Life.
I was also thinking of Groundhog Day.
Oh, yeah, totally. Absolutely.
People who have said that they've loved this film range from Akira Kurosawa, Frank Darabont, who did Shawshank Redemption, David Lynch. Steven Spielberg said, It's a Wonderful Life shows that every human being on this earth matters. That's an incredible statement. Orson Welles said, there's no way of hating this movie.
Yeah.
And the film was included by the Vatican in a list of important films in 1995.
John Cassavetes is another guy influenced by Capra, and you kind of see this in the looseness of Capra's actors and their immediacy. There's a quote of his that I think about a lot where it's like, maybe there never was an America. Maybe it was only Frank Capra.
Oh, yeah, I love that. I remember that. In the dialogue, George Bailey has that monologue early in the film where he goes, how should poor people work up to save if they haven't money? How long must they sacrifice while they make the rich richer? This movie gets across the sentimentality of the struggle of the American dream
while realizing it's still a struggle. And it expresses that, again, Christian message to help the poor around you, and that's what's important. Where has that neighborliness gone that was so important to America back in the 1940s?
There's a raven that works at the bank, and there's just like a bird at the bank, and I actually was so curious about it that I looked it up, and his name is Jimmy the Raven. He was a bird star of the 40s. Capra used this raven in several of his films.
They also apparently invented a new kind of fake snow for the movie that gave off less sound.
At the end of this film, that really tops off everything is the visual of 4 kids clinging to their father. And being a father now, you know that feeling. It's kind of unique and dreamy, and it is one of those American ideals that wraps up the story and wraps up Christmas. And when you watch it right before you experience that, it becomes a part of that sentiment. They say Wonderful Life didn't have a great release or anything, but it was nominated for 5 Academy Awards, including Best Picture. Capra actually didn't get hired that much after because this thing was such a failure. I don't know if you guys know, the reason why it blew up again later was the copyright was removed. TVs put it on the air because it didn't cost anything. Capra himself said, "It's the damnedest thing I've ever seen." The film has a life of its own now, and I can look at it like I had nothing to do with it. I'm like a parent whose kid grows up to be president.
That's what you call a happy ending.
Right?
Yeah.
The copyright is still sort of in the discussion because very recently a version of it was uploaded to Amazon as streaming that excises the entire Pottersville sequence. And the reason is because the Pottersville sequence is the part of the film that is technically under copyright because it's based on an existing short story. And the rest of the movie is still technically out of copyright. So they just uploaded the whole version to Amazon without the Pottersville sequence. It's like 35 minutes shorter. Can you imagine watching the movie and it doesn't have that?
No!
That's such a different film.
So it just cuts from him on the bridge to like, oh, never mind.
I guess
I'm cool.
I guess so. It's some weird copyright there.
It's so sad because you know that somebody watched that for the first time that way, like somebody out there.
All right, with that, you guys, we've gone through all of the films. We did it again very nicely.
It was so cool to watch all these movies. Like, there wasn't a bum one in the bunch.
That's the best part about doing this. You watch all these movies from the same time period, and you start to see like, oh, a lot of these movies reflect the same anxieties, techniques, and all of this stuff. It's like going to a class, really. It's been great. I've really enjoyed doing this project, and my wife has gotten into it with me. It's really fun.
Let's vote.
All right.
Let's get this thing going. While we're voting, you guys can listen to my good friend Shanali. Here's a track off of her new album called One Machine at a Time that I also did the official music video for. You can check that out on YouTube. Just search One Machine at a Time, Shanali, to see what you're about to hear. Now we have voted. We have the tallies back.
Everyone's was really hard. I don't dislike these movies.
Yeah,
it's like I just went on like a gut instinct.
That's what I do.
I tried not to even double think. I almost caught myself going back and I'm like, no, I'm just going to send it. This is what.
It's going to get harder and harder continuing to do these decades because even in the 40s, it was like, what do you choose? I can't believe we left out Casablanca. The Maltese Falcon. No one picked any Hitchcock movies, which was baffling to me.
Oh, Hitchcock. Yeah. His best movies are coming.
Yeah, his best. I mean, I'm sure someone in the 50s is going to pick.
Yeah, I was surprised nobody picked Maltese Falcon.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love the movie. It's like one of my favorites, but like...
So the winner of my nomination is Thief of Baghdad. The winner of Cecil's nomination is Meshes of the Afternoon. John Robert Hammer's nomination that broke through the finish line was Citizen Kane. Kevin Hinman's nomination that will go on to the final round is The Red Shoes. So those are our 4 finalists. That is, again, Thief of Baghdad, Meshes of the Afternoon, Citizen Kane, and The Red Shoes.
Citizen Kane is a movie that explodes the possibilities of cinema, drills deep into the heart of the American character, and created a myth. It feels like the ultimate movie.
The Red Shoes by Emmerich Pressburger and Michael Powell, a movie that really pushed cinema forward because it is the first great film about art in a decade that really starts to engage with the creative process directly. The effects are seamless, the ballet is beautiful, and the script is razor sharp.
It has that 15-minute dance sequence in the middle, the self-reflection of the same storyline told in dance within the film in the cinematic art form. It's really special.
My winner was Meshes of the Afternoon, one of the pure works of cinema. It's a silent movie that tells its entire story with vivid, bold visuals that you can't get out of your mind. And its legacy has been gigantic. You can see almost any abstract, surreal movie, and you can trace something of it back to Meshes of the Afternoon. It helped give a post-narrative form to these moving images that really works on an emotional level and a feminist level. It's one of our few female-directed choices. You really get to follow her journey in a way that most male directors would never have thought of.
This, along with Citizen Kane, are films that are always taught in film school. That means something. That means anybody who's interested in becoming a filmmaker before they finish college is going to see both of these movies. But that being said, I'm going to argue for Thief of Baghdad. Aside from touching this cinematic film class that Scorsese was in, that De Palma was in, that Coppola said that affected him more than any movie in his life. Aside from the amazing storytelling, the beautiful colors that Powell incorporated, they invented probably the most used special effect and the most famous special effect in green screen and chroma keying. They did it successfully in a detailed and intricate way that is unforgettable. With that, we're all going to rank these, and we're going to come back with a winner. Since Shanali's music is so great, I couldn't help but help out with another music video. This track is called Driving Nowhere.
We made it to the other side. You said we'd always survive. That's how it sounds when I turn shy. I'm in town to stick out my space on your mantle. I miss all your parts and your strange angles. I'd rather not know what you've been up to. Do you still stay up late and watch Dazed and Confused? These are the things that are not allowed. These are the things I can't live without. You're off the hook, we're driving nowhere.
The votes are in. It has been decided the Fresh Air Award. In fourth place is The Red Shoes, Powell and Pressburger's beautiful color. In third place, introducing green screen, was The Thief of Baghdad. So that leaves us with Citizen Kane. And will we have our first woman director win feature and a short award with Meshes and the Afternoon? No, we will not. Citizen Kane, the typical winner,
No, we will not.
wins this one. Okay? So I hope you guys are happy. That's where we are.
It's hard to be basic, but sometimes it's the right thing to be.
There was a part of me that was like, we might get a Mesh of the Afternoon upset. I was like prepared for that. I felt like that could happen, but
All four of those films, incredible films.
yeah.
Every single one, I was like, that's too low.
And and really, I would say all of the films that are talked about in this podcast, these films all push cinema forward, and a lot of them are available on streaming platforms like Max and Criterion and things like that.
Or YouTube for Hell's a Poppin'.
Or YouTube.
Keep circulating the tapes.
Oh, man. All right, you guys, let's say goodbye. JR, if you want to promote anything or say your final goodbyes.
All right. I recently shot a new short film. It's called December Day Zero. It's a little tale of love and addiction and the blurred lines between the two. And we're about to enter post-production on it. It's going to hit the festival circuit in 2026. And honestly, I'm really excited for you guys to see this.
This year, I'm doing a letterbox project called My Year of Trash, where every week I'm watching a trashy genre film and re-engaging with my love of the visceral joys of cinema. I'm on Letterboxd as Spesh to Death, so Spesh space 2 space death.
Wait, 2 as in the numeral 2?
No, 2 as in the word.
Okay, Spesh to Death.
SPESH. That's also my rap moniker as well, if you ever want to listen to some rap music.
Yeah, it's great.
Watch movies, they're great. I have that to recommend, especially some of these 40s ones. And if you're ever in Brooklyn on a Tuesday and want to try some tough but fair trivia, join me and my co-host Shay Fillmore at the Nighthawk Prospect Park. We usually do it on the first and third Tuesday, but you can check dates at the website if you just Google that.
Thanks a lot for coming out and chatting with me. Just for Fourwind's forecast to look forward to, we're still working on some features that are going to be coming out next year. Check out Love Sets Maneuver and then my own frames of reference. But on top of that, something that you can watch right now is American Godfathers, The Five Families. It's a 3-part series out on history. You can also rent it on Amazon and different places. I work with the Barnacle Brothers as an editor. It is quite popular, going through 150 years of Italian New York mafia, something everybody loves. It's really fascinating, and you'll learn a lot about the mafia that you didn't know you didn't know. So,
And what's that on again, Justin?
it's on history. You can rent it on Amazon. We might do a little bit more on Feature and a Short. It's on a little bit of financial pause, aside from the Fresh Air Award. We will definitely be watching the 1950s next year, so stay tuned, watch at home, so you can play along and tell us what we missed. With that, I'll talk at you soon.
Thank you.
Au revoir.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thanks for having us.